Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. A far cry from the anti-nuke statement that spawned the large lizard's origins, 1973's Godzilla vs. Megalon serves up twice the plot and half the miniature mashing from other installments. Throwing caution and physics to the winds, the 13th entry in the Showa series features the underwater race of Seatopians, who, ticked off by another round of nuclear testing, unleashed the giant beetle-looking monster Megalon to destroy Tokyo. In response, Ultraman-inspired Jet Jaguar robot enlists the help of Godzilla, whereupon the Seatopians bring back Gigan from outer space, and the last 25 minutes are basically an oversized wrestling match for the ages. The dubbing is awful, the effects are cheesy, the human characters inane, and logic entirely absent. However, as a purely ribald roaring rumble, it delivers the goods, along with a couple good flying drop kicks from our favorite rubber-suited hero, later immortalized in MST3K's opening credits. I'm very excited to talk with my panel tonight and to celebrate one of my personal favorite movies from all time. So let's bring in everybody and let's say hi to Barry Kaufman.
Thanks for having me tonight.
Stan Hyde.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
And Dave M. Gray.
Hello.
And we are talking about Godzilla vs. Megalon from 1973, celebrating its 50th anniversary. Welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for coming on. Again, this is one of my personal favorite Godzilla films. It's one of my personal favorite films in general. It's kind of one of the movies that got me inspired to be a horror fan, to be a monster movie fan. I'd love to just kind of go around and find out what people's personal experiences were with the movie, where they saw it, when they saw it, how old they were. And then we can roll into the conversation about the film proper. Barry, let's go ahead and start with you.
As probably everybody knows, this film came out in very wide saturation in 1976. And who wasn't excited to see full-page ad mats in the newspaper for a Godzilla film? You know, with that cool font, that kind of mod Godzilla versus Megalon font and the monsters on the trade tower. So it was playing all over. I lived in Chicago, playing all over Chicago, and I lived in the south suburbs. So it played for a couple of weeks wide, you know, at least, and it, you know, shrank in its distribution. So I went to see it 9 times during its first release, going with different friends. I went down to because I was at that time, I was only 12, but I was taking the train down to the city occasionally to go to some of those giant old theaters in the Loop of Chicago, you know, the old quote unquote grindhouse cinemas. And one of them had Godzilla versus Megalon. It was a 1,500 seat theater called United Artists. So I saw it there, which was beautiful. I mean, that was fantastic to see regardless of the film, you know, just seeing Godzilla on that scale. All the friends I took to see it, who ranged from my age to some more serious filmmaking friends who were a little older, all really enjoyed it. Some were more critical. You know, the older friends were a bit more critical in a certain sense, but they certainly understood the spirit of the film. And there's no doubt that whatever the quality of the film, the people in the audience with me were highly amused and highly into the film. And that's one of the things about this film that you could certainly debate. So that was my experience in terms of seeing it. I'll talk later about my contacts with Donald Veld, you know, who distributed the film, and Roger Ebert, who I was in courses in, who gave the film 3 stars. And I talked to him about that in person, you know, when I was young. Wonderful. So I have some things about that, but that was my experience, and it was thoroughly positive. So of course we retain that in our adult years, sort of, and that since that experience was so positive, I still have a very good feeling about this film, despite the quality and the fact it's like a Zone Fighter episode in many ways. I still have a very good feeling about this film.
Awesome. Thank you, Barry. Stan, how about you?
Well, you know, it's weird. I as a kid, I saw King Kong versus Godzilla in a theater in Winnipeg, and then moved out to British Columbia in Canada, and didn't see another Godzilla film for years. So most of the Godzilla films, most Showa films, I saw on TV, and on according to Wikipedia, March 15th, 1977, NBC broadcast this movie with John Belushi in a Godzilla suit cut down to an hour. And that's where I saw it. I was a university student in a cheap apartment with a black and white TV and watched the cut down black and white version of Godzilla versus Megalon. So not too auspicious as a beginning, but I do like this film quite a bit, actually. And I have seen it like subsequently in a theater and elsewhere. But yeah, I had a fun time just watching it in black and white way back when too.
Yeah, the idea that this Godzilla was playing in a prime time slot, and again, I'm trying to imagine what that 48-minute version looked like, because they trimmed it down because Belushi had his skits and then there was the commercial time, so you really only got 48 minutes of the movie. And I'm kind of like, oh, I would love to see that at some point.
Sadly, like seeing things on TV the first time, my first viewing of Destroy All Monsters was cut down to fit in a 60-minute slot with a few monsters and more plot than necessary. So it wasn't the best way to see them, but that's what it was.
There you go. And Dave, how about you?
TV, the Godzilla movies. We had local WDCA showed everything they showed Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, just endlessly with mostly my grandmother. So, just soaked them all up there. And that's where I definitely saw this one the first time. They showed it and Destroy All Monsters constantly. So,
and Destroy All Monsters actually celebrating an anniversary this year as well. It's turning 55, same age as me. I also saw it on TV. But I actually did get to see this in the theater in a double feature with Giant Spider Invasion, directed by Bill Rebane. And that was a wonderful double feature. I can't remember which one, was the headliner or not, but my Uncle Dave took me to that, and it was amazing. Both of those movies really worked for me at that age, and, as you get older and older, Barry and I were talking about this backstage, you see things from a different standpoint. You see, maybe some of the plot holes and some of the cheesiness of the special effects. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've seen that scene in another Godzilla movie. What's going on here? But when you're watching it for the first time through those 9-year-old eyes, it's magic, both of those films. And so it has remained a favorite because I think as you get older, as I got older, and I was able to appreciate kind of the cheesiness of movies, I appreciate it on a completely different level. I just love the kind of how gonzo it is. They're like, that's right, we're going to use, stock footage from pretty much 7. Let's go with 7 different movies. And then, Godzilla's not even going to show up really until like the last 15 minutes. And I'm like, wow, like who does that in a Godzilla movie? Let's dive into that idea of like when you're a kid watching this movie versus as an adult. What has changed for you? Stan, if I can bounce to you, you and I met at G-Fest about 10 years ago, and you gave several wonderful lectures. And I'm curious, like, as immersed in the G culture as you are, like, how does this film change for you?
Well, yeah, and remember, I never saw this as a kid. So I'm like a second-year university student. So okay. Luckily I was not, my standards were not so high that I ignored the film completely. I mean, I think it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of stock. I find with all Godzilla films, even ones I really didn't like when I first saw, I find with time acceptance comes and you start to see things in them. I really hated Final Wars the first time I saw it. At this point, it's I'm not arguing that it's a great movie, but I find I can accept it. And with Megalon, actually, in terms of those late period Showa movies, I like it better than Godzilla versus Gigan. You were mentioning there's the very long kind of monster wrestling match at the end, and despite the fact there's a lot of secondhand footage in terms of Megalon's attacks being from King Ghidorah, right, and the military footage from all kinds of things, from Destroy All Monsters to War of the Gargantuas. When you get past that, there's actually a fair amount of cool new footage, like the destruction of the dam, and I love Seatopia. I love the lake flaming. I love the Oh, I wish I could get myself like that watercraft that for people who like monster wrestling, and that's one part of the genre. There's the serious part of the genre, and there is the monster wrestling part of the genre. It's an epic battle at the end, and it's
Yeah.
not composed of stock footage. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it at this point. There might have been times when I thought, oh, I like the serious ones more, and I do. But Godzilla versus Megalon is a lot of fun. And in prepping for this, we've got Monster Movie Mondays over at my place with a bunch of people who show up. And, ordinary person who only occasionally see Godzilla vote was also like, oh, this is kind of cool.
You talked about the Seatopians, like that whole Atlantis-inspired. It looks completely different from the rest of the movie. And what also looks very different is instead of fighting like in a cityscape, well, I guess King Kong versus Godzilla, they're fighting out in the woods and on, Mount Fuji. But there's no miniatures for them to crash into, which means we can have more monster battle because we don't have to, build things for them to crash into.
There's a lot of open air monster battle, which is great. And the other thing I was thinking when you were talking about Seatopia, where else are you going to see Robert Dunham in a tiara and a silver dress, man? Some people were doing a cosplay thing at G-Fest a few years ago, and Shinji Higuchi was sitting in front of me, and they started doing that, and he was just howling, and he turned back and said, "Do you know this?" It's like, yeah, we all know this. So yeah, I think the appreciation is very broad for it.
And Barry, I've you ran House of Monsters in Chicago for a long time, and I remember Godzilla kind of being like one of the centerpieces of the store. Where does this land kind of in your Godzilla appreciation? Was this the first Godzilla film you saw?
No, I was fortunate enough before that to see a double feature matinee of Godzilla versus Smog Monster and Destroy All Monsters when AIP reissued those. It's probably 10 years old. Saw that twice in a row. And that was tremendous. So those are my first films that I saw in the theater. I saw Where the Gargantua was on Creature Features prior to that, and I'd seen some things prior that were fantastic. But this film in particular, I sort of use it as a springboard for people. We're talking about Godzilla, and some of my more serious, older Godzilla friends who included me in their community in Chicago when I was younger, which was very kind of them. They're like 10 years older than me. They recount seeing films like this, and specifically where I can understand, I guess, is they saw Destroy All Monsters, and then the next year Godzilla's Revenge came out, like, oh, fantastic. And then went to see it in the theater, and like they're 19 or 20 years old, and oh, what is this? So I can understand that to an extent, but fortunately, and I think that was one of the fun things about the House of Monsters, it's a fun thing about G-Fest, is I don't really feel that way about the Godzilla films, particularly the Showa series. Retains a particular charm for me, and not only because I saw it as a kid, it still does, that the other films simply don't possess. I mean, I can like those films. The suit designs are cool and loud, and they have great effects. They're missing something that the Showa series has, some energy that it has, and a charm that it has, and that was never lost on me. So when people say, "Oh, Godzilla Revenge is so terrible," and that kid in the shorts, his shorts are so short, and Godzilla versus Megalon is all this stock footage and that music, boing 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 boing, rah, 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 that kind of stuff. I kind of like that. I hate to say in Godzilla versus a Smog Monster and Godzilla versus Megalon, because Godzilla was like a kid's hero, and that's a heroic champion theme of him marching along, like, in his kind of comical way as he does in these films with more personality. I think that's one thing I always bring out to people is Godzilla versus Megalon, and those films preceding it, certainly starting maybe with Sea Monster, and going on from there a little bit. Godzilla, and Ghidorah a little bit too, Godzilla was adopting this personality. And it was a personality, the guy in the suit. It was a personality, maybe a little comical. But I think, for me anyway, because that's the creativity and imagination that goes into these films. I mean, I still retain that perspective when I look at them. And I think, wow, what a wonderful children's film Godzilla's Revenge is. It's actually really well directed by Ishiro Honda. Some of the scenes in the warehouse and the crime scenes are really well done, actually, for a low budget film. They really are. And it's got a great lesson. It's got a lot to do with the way Japanese culture was at the time. And the latchkey kids, Godzilla versus Megalon doesn't have that as much. It starts out with this nuclear premise, anti-nuclear, shows all this militarism and stuff. I'm like, wow, this is going to be pretty heavy. And then Megalon attacks Japan, which never really had any nuclear intentions at all. They should be attacking the US or Russia or whatever, but that was kind of crazy. But so it didn't really have that intent. But still, the film retains something that I think sometimes we have to look at things with different eyes and say, yeah, there's a quality issue. Yeah, there's a budget issue. It cost $1 million to make in America. Well, that's nothing, you know? So you have to appreciate they got something out of it. And the fact, again, if you can look at it through a kid's eyes and not worry about all those things, how much enjoyment you can get from those films. It's not meant to be looked at as a critical, you know, film and critical success or this or that. And that's what I talked about with Roger Ebert, which I'll tell you later. He was very insightful, and I give him credit for that. I give him a lot of credit.
Well, and I think you nailed it there, is that I feel like this film invites you in on a kid's level.
Yeah.
It doesn't purport to be, I mean, even the anti-nuke message is done a very kind of like, you know,
elementary. Right. Yes.
Exactly. We're just going to talk about, you know, and I love it's like, yeah, and this is what happened. And it shows you what happened. It's kind of like, you know, it's one of those, you know,
instructional films. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Dave, you and I, you know, every time a new incarnation of Godzilla comes out, you always drop me a line, and we met online on the IMDb message boards. When you're looking at, say, this film versus something like a newer, you know, Shin Godzilla or something like that, you know, like how does this resonate for you as a G fan?
Well, of course, the newer ones I go in expecting more. Full stop. This I love the theatricality, the wrestling bit. I mean, the ending. It's Hulk Hogan beating up on Macho Man for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the new ones I expect more. Honestly, I'll be upset if they don't condescend to me a little and try to talk to some crazy ideas that they don't fully understand. I'm just disappointed if that's not there now. I need it. But for the old ones, I do love the simplicity. You mentioned watching them as a kid. I've been rewatching the whole Showa and Millennium with my niece who is 8.
Yeah.
And I get so much more appreciation for them now. Seeing it from that viewpoint again.
How did they go down with her
she loves them. Yeah. Oh, holy crap. She loves them. I don't know how many just so much Godzilla junk is in my house now. I mean, I see you guys stuff, but her collection is rivaling Stan's, and she hasn't been at it for nearly as long. There's a drive-in in PA. They do a lot of specialty showings. It was the first time she was around kids that loved Godzilla as much as she did. That was just amazing. 3 days watching Godzilla movies at a drive-in.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else like that.
I think I remember being that kid who liked Godzilla more than anybody else in the schoolyard. And even though they played on the same, you know, Saturday afternoon matinees and we all watched them, it didn't feel like this film resonated for them the way it did for me. I remember in 3rd grade, we had an essay assignment on My Hero, and I wrote about Godzilla, and my teacher, who I was considered a good student, and my teacher, like, I thought you were going to take this seriously, Aaron. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Godzilla is awesome. Like, here's all the things that he's a great guy. And she was like, look, you either go back and write something serious, or you can go down to the principal's office. And I was like, can we talk a little bit about the film proper? I do want to just start off with the whole Seatopian viewpoint, which is, that there's a nuclear testing being done, and that obliterates like a third of their country. And so they understandably are upset about this, but their plan is a little questionable, because their plan is to, first off, go get this robot. They need robots because they don't have time to make their own, but they have the technology to know that Goro, the inventor, has a robot that he hasn't announced to anybody. And then that robot is going to guide their subterranean monster, who's a beetle. And I'm kind of like, you're underwater. Why is it a beetle? But okay, I'll go with it. That robot is going to guide Megalon to, tear up Tokyo and basically destroy their infrastructure. I'm like, that is a heck of a plan, guys.
Yeah. I was going to say, and your two monsters that basically you created, co-opted into this plan, both have do not have opposable thumbs.
Right. And he never uses this really,
Kind of at a disadvantage. So there's that in the plan too. It just doesn't seem like a really. Although I like the dance number, and like I say, where are you going to see Robert Dunham in it? I want that tiara, by the way. I don't know if anybody's ever, made a collectible version of that, but I desperately want one of those Megalon.
They will.
I think you need to put that out there to the G crowd. Yep.
Somebody will
make it. No. I just love that their plan isn't to take over and destroy everything. It's just to be left alone.
Yeah.
I think I don't think any of the others do that. Like everybody else we want to destroy the earth for, I don't know, because I can. So it's nice to have a different reason for it. And the car that Goro has. That's awesome, a dune buggy, actually, made in Norway. That was a dune buggy that they just strapped a radiator to and then sold as a car for a few years.
That's so good.
The nuclear premise, it's interesting. I certainly shouldn't mention this film in the same breath as Day the Earth Stood Still, but there always is sort of a hypocrisy about that. Like in Day the Earth Stood Still, Gort comes down to say, hey, you guys can't do this. You're going to destroy the universe. But then we've got this robot that's going to blow everything up, and can be so violent, So it's the same thing as Seatopia, which I always think that's so funny when say, oh, gosh, you guys can't have this nuclear plant. You're going to destroy us. So instead of destroying us, a war crime against us, we'll commit one against you guys with the cockroach and the, guy from Space Hunter Nebula M or whatever. I just think that's always kind of, and that those movies kind of got to that point where the earlier Godzilla films were much more conscious of the premise and were sort of more consistent in their universe about whether it's environmental concerns. And Godzilla versus Smog Monster is the first film I saw, which is why, like you, Aaron, Godzilla was my hero. That's the first film I saw. I'm like, wow, this is great. Somebody's actually doing something about it. And I loved it because it was so dark. And I was really impressed. I was like, this film is, people didn't like it, but it's serious at times, even though it's, crazy and comical, And obviously, again, I was a little disappointed that Megalon didn't take it further, kind of just veered off into, in that way I was disappointed, but I realized what it was, and it was still a fun movie. But it is interesting how that always sort of comes into play where there's this, like, we've got to stop you from destroying the earth. So we're going to, or destroying our world. So we're destroying your world. It's like, I love that exchange.
That the whole thing with the red sand and the button that is made out of that sand. I'm like, what? Wait, what? Like they make buttons? Where the rest of the earth clothes come from, we don't know, but we know where the buttons come from. They come from that red sand from 3,000 miles below the surface. But let's talk about the Seatopian agents, because that was something I noticed on this last viewing, was that we have our two main Seatopian agents, but then we also have like some random motorcycle riding guy, and I'm like, where did he come from?
Once you got a motorcycle, that's all you need.
Exactly. I think they like the transport stuff in this film. Really, seriously, they were into it. Into different modes of transport and chasing. A lot of action chasing.
They have a motorcycle. They got a shipping container truck. What more do you need?
A model plane is genius.
Oh yeah, it was fixed. That was great. That's a great.
The model plane is another one that I've just loved. I mean, the fact that they go through this whole thing. We're going to go get this model plane, and basically we're just going to throw it into his face. I'm like, because a rock isn't good enough. There's some intricate plotting here that I don't know that's necessary. I love it.
Would a plane bloody his nose? Rock bloody his nose like a plane would? I don't know, because that was pretty bloody, actually.
Is that just the shop they bought everything at? Like, were they just there on a Thursday and went, let's just film one scene real quick?
There's that fissure that opens up with where the kid is on the little paddle machine that I'm assuming his brother made for him, because where else would that come from? Also, I was telling Barry backstage, like they're going home from the lake, but there's no trailer on their car. So I don't know how they got that device out to the lake in the first place. But there's that fissure that opens up when the earthquake happens following the test. And we see kind of like these glowing lights going along. Any ideas on what that is?
Something they had in the basement.
Actually, if you look at the Seatopia scenes, but it is like the Vegas string light kind of thing. They had that going on down there. So maybe they have a massive like stage down there with all these string lights where everybody can do their own show or something, because it looked a lot like those lights in the background, you know. So
yeah. Any other moments that you all want to call out? I've got a laundry list of them.
The shipping container. I love the action in the shipping container as it's just flying through the air. That's great. Any of the chase scenes I think are top rate in this, just because of the vehicles involved.
Complete with sad trombone noise when the guy pulls the paint onto his head.
The dam destruction stuff is good. I really like the model stuff there. There's not a lot of model work, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the dam is amazing.
I love, it's not a huge one, but for some reason I always love Godzilla's extended first appearance. His long walk, like with his arms up like this. He was imitating Hiro Nakajima used to do that to make, because the neck was so long, to make it look like there was more proportion in shoulders. I forgot who the suit actor was in this film. I should know that.
It's Shinji Tagaji.
Gotcha. Okay. It looked like he was imitating him in a way, but he was walking like that, and that walk, as in his appearance, was like 20 miles long with that music. But for some reason, that was really like impressive to me. You know,
they had to give us time to get the good Jews harp noise in there.
Boing, boing, boing.
Boing, boing. I was like, yes.
So
the score for this is just bananas.
Yeah, the flute during the car chase, that jazz flute. Yeah, that's real smooth. You know,
there's also in the shipping the truck that's driving the shipping. Also, like the fact that they are taking these two brothers and they're going to take the shipping container to an elevator in the fissure that's going to bring. I just caught that for the first time this most recent viewing. They're going to take and they're going to go down so that they can make more robots. I guess that's the
maybe
idea?
Seems like they're pretty easy to make. Seems like it's not that hard to make them. You know, from what he was doing. I don't know how he did that. And then they big and small, like I think when your answer to that thing about not having a trailer on the car, probably that dolphin boat probably shrinks and gets bigger too.
Or just becomes its own trailer.
It's like
a transformer.
Those dolphins turn into wheels. They just curl up on each other.
The idea that like we've got Easter Island thrown in there.
I love that.
You know,
that's cool. That's cool.
There's just
those heads.
And this script apparently was written in like 2 weeks.
That is twice as long as I would have guessed.
Because, well, the first week they just sat around drinking, and then they got around to writing the actual script.
Okay.
But I think, you know, as I said, like as a kid, it's action. It's like action, 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 action. And it's not about connecting the dots. It's about how much can we put on screen. I would have liked to have had more Godzilla, because I think, you know, at that point, Godzilla is the star at that point, you know, like he's the marquee monster. And so to kind of keep him shunted off to Monster Island for as long as they do, I thought that was a curious choice. But I think also they were trying to cash in on the whole Ultraman movement. And so they were putting Jet Jaguar front and center.
They need to sell those toys. And let's be fair, I love Jet Jaguar. I love him. The colors, the design, that face.
He's happy all the time.
All the time. I love it.
There he is. Yeah, it's great.
Love that.
He's friendly.
Hi, Jet Jaguar. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's being friendly or he wants to kill me, but I'm down with it. I'm ready, Jet. Let's go.
Damn good Jack Nicholson smile.
Oh man, it's a great. Well, and this is the thing. Like when again talking about that kid logic, you know,
the house.
Oh my God. Show the little guy. I want to see the little guy again. Oh, that's great.
And yeah, and the deform. Where's it? Oh, this guy. They're everywhere. What can I say? That's one of those things that I just like.
Oh man,
it's an
I love
iconic.
that Super Deformer.
It's an instantly iconic character. But the fact that it's explained that he goes from human size to monster size simply as he must have programmed himself, and that's that kid logic where you go, well, yeah, clearly that's what happened.
Yeah, the dangers of AI. We're not.
Well, I mean, he gives up self-control just because he's done.
Yeah, he's like, I've done what I need to do, but if I need to take over again, I will.
And let's be fair, with those guys controlling him, he's not going to have much choice. They're not good at it.
But of course, as a kid, all I could think of is if he can make himself that big, why can't he make himself 5 times as big as Megalon? You know, I mean, why did he make himself that big? You know, what's the limits on this? So that's kind of interesting.
He didn't have enough time to work on that program. He didn't have the time to code all that.
Right.
I actually have never thought of that, Barry. Like, why doesn't he just make himself so he can just go to Megalon and
the kid logic's always working in me.
You did bring up a good point that this was one of the first films that Haruo Nakajima, who had played Godzilla since 1954, that this was one of the first films he did not appear in, and he was replaced by Shinji Takagi. And the subsequent films, those also had suit actors who only did the one and done for Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and Terror of Mechagodzilla. And we really didn't get a consistent Godzilla suit actor again until we had Ken Satsuma, who actually plays Gigan in this movie. He went on to play Godzilla for the Heisei series from 84 to 95. Haruo Nakajima is just kind of an unsung hero, sung only by G fans, but he gave that character so much personality, from the terrifying version of him to the more jocular and juvenile version.
Yeah, suit acting is acting, just like now motion capture acting is acting. It's one of those things that people kind of aren't aware of until they see somebody look goofy, and then it's like, oh, why is he not as good as he used to be? So right. I kind of like the way in this movie that Godzilla shows up as like a cameo, like all of a sudden, you know, Clint Eastwood shows up or whatever. I love the photos where he's got like the telephone pole in his mouth like a toothpick, and he's wielding a big branch like a samurai sword. I kind of wish that had made it into the film. It's okay, I got models of that.
Well, apparently this was the same suit, and this suit only got a week to be constructed as well, but they made it like more dog-like is the way I've heard it described, so that it gave him more of a friendly cartoon quality. It made him funny and fun. And then they made more modifications apparently when it showed up on Zone Fighter, because I think this was the same suit that they used for those episodes.
And Jun Fukuda directed, I think, in the same year as Megalon. He directed the Zone Fighter episode, I think, the same year.
Got it. And Jun Fukuda is the director for this film. He'd done a couple of films prior to this one. Ishiro Honda did Destroy All Monsters, and then Godzilla's Revenge, which I think, you know, it's funny because they do Destroy All Monsters, which is supposed to be kind of like the culmination of the kaiju. And then the following year, Ishiro Honda does a very kind of like personal film in Godzilla's Revenge. And because it doesn't meet with a lot of success, people are like, we got to come up with another versus kind of movie. And they can't get Godzilla versus Gigan followed that. Or was it Smog Monster? Smog Monster
first.
Smog Monster, right.
Which didn't have stock footage and was its own movie and was a little more of a step up in production. And then when that didn't meet with approval, obviously.
But it's so weird.
I love it so much. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the first one I saw, and I was like, what a weird, wacky movie that is, especially through adult eyes.
Yeah, I think time has redeemed that movie in every way. Plus, it always makes me happy with these new legendary films to see that Mr. Bano's name is on there as an executive producer. So, you know, ultimately he was somewhat responsible for the resurrection of Godzilla. So that's kind of sweet too.
Well, I do love that.
He called me at the House of Monsters when we opened, and he asked me, he didn't have an American version of Godzilla versus Smog Monster.
Oh, wow.
And it had come out on Orion Video, and he saw me advertising on the web, and he said, I wonder, you know, everybody tells me, you know, blah, blah. And I said, of course, I'll send you a copy. And I said, I just want to let you know, people, you know, I know that film caused you some trouble when you put it out. I said, but it was actually very prescient. It was looking forward. And it was an avant-garde film. And I, as a filmmaker at the time, I was making films when I was very young, really appreciated that you did something so different and took a risk with it, even though it caused you a problem. He's like, oh, thank you. He was like so appreciative, because that film is unfairly maligned, I think, really. It's got a lot of interesting things in there and a lot of different forms of media, animation, strange, you know, wipes and weird things going on that other Godzilla films do not have. So I appreciate that.
I was just going to say, I had supper with Mr. Bano once because at G-Fest, and got to talk to him for a long time. And he was talking about Rachel Carlson and the book Silent Spring. and how brave he thought she was, and how maybe she was even risking like death or something to write that book at the time she was. So he was serious about this stuff, which you kind of get from that movie, as much as it's super weird, from the fish people to all kinds of other things that are going on. He was serious about what he was doing. And I think that shows through, which is ultimately why that movie has kind of an interesting, it's a serious Godzilla movie sort of understanding of fans ultimately, even though, it's not like any other Godzilla movie. It's unique. So great. Good on him. Great job.
Talking about kind of the unpopularity of certain, like this movie was the first movie to not even get 1 million viewers in Japan. Like it was a resounding failure in Japan. It was the downward slide. Yet it was the most successful movie in the US. Like when it got the theatrical release through cinema shares and then being shown on prime time, like this was a lot of people's, this was the Godzilla movie they saw, if not first, then the most. Like it just got that you mentioned earlier, Barry, that it got great promotion because it came out in 76, the same year that Dino De Laurentiis's King Kong was coming out. And that had, Kong standing atop the Twin Towers. Well, this one had Megalon on one Twin Tower and Godzilla on the other Twin Tower. It was, it was just an amazing campaign, and it was just wildly successful. So it's funny how like different cultures accept different things. Like the Japanese were kind of done with Godzilla, and Americans were like, yes, this is wonderful. I love this.
It certainly revitalized Godzilla in America in a particular way. And I know that just from the community that I was in terms of people going to see it with me and saying, wow, that was really crazy. And then wanting to see more Godzilla, and, I'll say in general, people say, oh, these movies are so childish, whatever. But if they weren't making movies for children, nobody would have been seeing those movies at all, so Godzilla would have really disappeared. So they did what they had to do at the time. And then, yeah, thank goodness he could come back later and Biollante, but there might not have been a Biollante, or Godzilla 84 for that matter, 85, if there wasn't that change in tone, which was very rapid from Smog Monster, by the way, in like a year and a half or two, from the darkest you could get to the lightest you can get. But I think that's important to remember that, that childish tone, I think, is a lot of times what really attracted people to that film in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
I don't think you can approach Godzilla linearly, just for that very reason. They only work because it's comic book. You can issue to issue, you can swing totally different ways.
Weirdly, Godzilla almost strikes me as an actor because he has all these different characters that he embodies.
That's great, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, so he's playing a slightly different role this time. And, that is, I think, one of the things that has allowed the series to go on for so long and make it so long lasting is he's not just, this monster that, I mean, I love Aliens, but they pretty much do the same thing every time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not quite the same as, this time Godzilla is, this time it's kind of a comedy, this time it's a children's story, this time it's a serious parable about nuclear disaster, and it's like, oh, he does all this stuff. One of the things that I think has maintained interest in the character over the years.
Hey Barry, go ahead. What was the encounter with Roger Ebert? That he was at your school?
No, I was fortunate enough. My mother was so kind because I didn't read a lot, and I wasn't doing great in classes sometimes. I was so interested in movies all the time. So she took me down to Spertus University, which is now Columbia in Chicago, to take film classes from Roger Ebert. So I got to take 6 years of film classes from Roger Ebert, and he taught me so much. And he was a great guy. I mean, he was a really good guy. And he took a liking to me because, of course, I was the youngest person in the class. That was an advantage at the time. And so when Godzilla versus Megalon came out, I said, oh, Mr. Ebert, you gave this movie 3 stars. Nobody is respecting this movie. I said, I really appreciate that. And I read your review, but I'm interested to know, like, how would you go against all these other critics who are just mocking it and making fun of it and actually look at it, in that way? And he said, well, Barry, from what I say here, that, film, is not always going to be on the level of the Howard Hawks films we're watching or the Robert Altman films we're watching or these films. It's not going to be on that level all the time. And I understand it. There's different purposes that film can serve. And he goes, as far as serving its purpose, that film with the audience I watched it with, served its purpose perfectly. And I appreciate that. And he also happened to like Godzilla. He appreciated the character. And he said, so yeah, I mean, I could tell it was a rushed film. It was haphazard. The film grains didn't match. And he goes, but that was part of the joy of it for me in a certain way, was that the film was so frantic and frenetic, and people felt that energy, the craziness, the desperation of it, making it under such rugged conditions. He said, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I always ascribed to that too. And that really sort of cemented that into my mind, is like, people are so critical. I know there's Mystery Science Theater. Okay, that's funny. I prefer to watch this film without them. I think it's way better, funnier without them myself. And most films I feel that way about, because I like to experience it through my lens, not through their lens. But sure, I think that was his perspective. And I really appreciated that. So he sort of gave me a new insight and confidence to go talk to people in that way and say, hey, no, this film doesn't actually, you may think it sucks, whatever. You can be a critic if you want to be, but listen to this. So that was my encounter with Roger.
That's an awesome story. I mean, yeah. my real job is being a film teacher. I still work for International Baccalaureate Films. So it's sort of like, that's a great story. Thanks, Barry. It's really
you're welcome. No, I that's inspirational. Then if you're a film instructor, certainly it's great.
You brought up Mystery Science Theater 3000. I mean, this kind of became an iconic part of their opening credits, was that flying dropkick. It just kind of like, exactly what movie you're watching when that's, when that final wrestling match, Godzilla holds up 2 fingers.
Yeah.
Like he's telling you, we're going to do this. And it's amazing. It reminds me of like in Smog Monster, when Godzilla flies, like when he inflates himself and you're like, what? I didn't know he could do that. We're 11 movies in and suddenly he's pulling out new powers. I feel like the same thing happens here. It's like, I've been watching this guy forever, and wait, he can do a flying drop kick. Are you kidding me? And I love the fact that he and Jet Jaguar, like, they just kind of, again, go into that kid logic, Jet Jaguar goes, Jack, and Godzilla's like, yep, got it. And off we go.
I was trying to figure out what the semaphore language was all the time. I really was. When I saw it so many times, I was trying to interpret that and say, this is semaphore, but I didn't ever know what he was saying.
I was going to say with MST3K, I find that I watch the films that they do separately, and I sort of treat riffing as, I think the one that really taught me that was actually Riff Tracks did Casablanca. And it turns out Casablanca is a great movie to riff on, but it's not the movie anymore. It's a performance, right? Yeah. Well, I can appreciate both of them. I don't think you need them to appreciate this movie. I do think the fact that so many people saw, particularly Gamera, but also the 2 Godzilla movies from MST, really brought a bunch of younger people into the fold, so to speak, because that was their moment where they first, encountered these films. So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in that age range, and most folks I know that watch Godzilla now came to them from Mystery Science Theater. I think it's actually a shame that I don't think either the Godzilla MST3K episodes are available because of rights things.
They used to be on the internet, and they were one of them was briefly on. That was one of those moments where I bought the box set and I thought I should buy 3 of these.
Yeah, I was on disc for like a month.
So it's like, yeah, I do own one.
But what was I going to say? Godzilla and Jet Jaguar. I think it's one of the reasons why I like this one is they communicate in a way that just it comes off better than with Rodan or Mothra, where it happens. Here they actually do communicate in some method.
Oh, I think Mothra communicates.
Mothra communicates. I'm not arguing that.
But okay,
well,
but I get it.
I know what Mothra is saying, but
I like what I forget which film it is where him and Anguirus are like, "Hey, Anguirus,
Gigan.
What do you want?"
Yeah, Godzilla versus Gigan. We gotta go, Anguirus. Time, saying nothing. That means anything, it's just that's great. That's something
so awesome, and they never do it again. Again, it's one more time where they just like do something. You're like, wait, they can talk.
Cavity Colors has a great shirt that's okay on the front, and then there's Angelus on the back of it. Like there's.
That's great. And you'll notice one of the most popular Godzilla images on stickers, shirts, everywhere is Jet Jaguar and Godzilla shaking hands. Yeah. It is one of those. I have it up. I have an artist's interpretation up here on my wall. I mean, that is a very popular image.
Well, that poster, the poster art, which is what we have as the splash page for this episode, is the 4 of them lined up, doing their hero pose together, which again, it's just wonderful. The Mystery Science Theater, like, I agree. I'm very much a fan of movies that are trying, movies that are doing their best, and it just doesn't quite make it in terms of, critical what is a quote good movie. And yeah, Stan, you can make fun of anything. Like, that's the thing. You can, if you have a good enough joke writer, you can make fun of any movie, and it can be funny, and that's okay. But I don't think you need to be making fun of this movie to enjoy this movie.
No, I just was kind of pointing out.
No, I agree.
T3K, they're actually very affectionate. I mean, it's like, it ends with them watching, the Crawling Eye, the very last episode, right? So they're actually very affectionate most of the time, and it's not a put down. When they started, there was the toy boat period where they were kind of just making obvious fun. But I think it changed to be something more endearing, more caring about the movie. So we all sort of felt like we were on the same side. But I'm also sympathetic. Stuart Galbraith once told me that what bugged him is sometimes you go to a theater and people start yelling things out at the screen, and it's sort of like, yeah, that's super annoying.
These movies it requires you to go for the ride. You have to be willing to just go and enter that universe. And again, I feel like this one does a great job of kind of presenting that from the get-go. You have a young protagonist who the kids can identify with. I love the fact that, I don't think it ever states that they're brothers, but I read that. No. I'm like, is it in the movie anywhere?
You know what? I'm not going to lie. Every time I've seen it, I've assumed he's adopted by them and they're a couple.
And I watched the movie last week, so I have no excuse here, but I'm not going to swear to it at this moment.
Oh, you know what? Can I show you guys something you can talk for? I want to show you one thing. I totally forgot. I should show you this. This is something you don't see very often. Speaking of your image of Godzilla, Megalon, and those guys, I'm going to be right back. Give me a moment. Hang on.
This is a first.
This is the Japanese B3 poster for Godzilla versus Megalon. I'll see if I can sort of get it in here. I don't know if I can get in here quite, but look at this. Wait, let's see.
Back it up just a little bit.
Wow. Look at everything.
Oh,
they're all talking to each other, like you said about the bubbles. This is a B3, so it's large, and this is one of my favorite posters actually. So it's the same sort of.
Oh, that's reasonable.
And they're all talking to each other and telling each other that one is saying, "I'm going to beat this guy up. I'm going to really, whatever." And like, Jet Jaguar, will you help me beat up Megalon? Yeah, sure, I will.
Oh, that's wonderful. I was saying backstage, like, what's the point of having a show if you can't talk about your favorite movies with people who want to talk about them with you? So thank you all so much for coming on and celebrating this movie. I look forward to having you all back in the studio again very soon.
Would love to. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, anytime.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.